Breaking news today. The same experts who once championed outsourcing and global trade deals are now raising alarms that reinstating tariffs could trigger a recession akin to the Great Depression. Why is the defense of American jobs suddenly being labeled as illegal, and who really benefits from this economic turmoil? Stay with us as we delve into the real issues affecting working families and cut through the noise to uncover the truth.
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
Boss NBC reports that Lawrence Trump predicts a 1929-style crash if President Trump returns the tariff funds he allegedly took illegally. Consider this. The same network that has supported decades of outsourcing, open borders, and globalist trade deals now claims that restoring a portion of American industry's lost wealth would trigger an economic disaster akin to the Great Depression. Why does it seem that every time this administration prioritizes American workers, cable news pundits predict economic catastrophe? Let's be clear. Tariffs are not a radical experiment, but a standard tool used by nearly every significant country to protect its citizens. Yet the Washington elite and their media allies label defending American jobs as illegal. Where was this legal concern when the previous administration allowed our manufacturing base to shift to China, making working families bear the cost? Suddenly, constitutional concerns are important, except when it involves open borders or perpetual wars. Consider who really benefits when America is discouraged from asserting its economic independence. It's not the families in Ohio or Michigan, but rather the multinational corporations and their Democratic allies who are determined to maintain the status quo. They would have you believe that standing up to unfair trade practices will bring disaster, but history shows us otherwise. The true crisis stems from decades of globalist policies, not from a president who dares to put America first. Tonight, let's examine the motives behind these grim forecasts. Are they about protecting the country, or are they about preserving the power of a ruling class that has failed to serve the people it claims to represent? Hold on to your hats.
Donald Trump cut the taxes of the highest earning Americans by $1 trillion, gave them $1 trillion. The Trump lawyer's letter to the appeals court said, the president believes that a forced dissolution of the agreements could lead to a 1929-style result. In such a scenario, people would be forced from their homes, millions of jobs would be eliminated, hardworking Americans would lose their savings, and even Social Security and Medicare could be threatened. That's the Trump prediction for giving Americans back the $130 billion that Donald Trump illegally took from them.
Claims that reversing tariff policies would cause a catastrophic economic collapse are exaggerated assertions often promoted by mainstream media and some political partisans. These tariffs were implemented not as a reckless cash grab, but to restore economic sovereignty, protect American jobs, and hold foreign competitors accountable after decades of unbalanced trade deals that undermine our manufacturing sector and outsource jobs. Despite alarmist claims, the administration's tariff strategy is legally supported by statutes such as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, allowing the president to address national economic threats with targeted tariffs. While courts may debate the extent of this authority, labeling these actions as illegal disregards the law's text and purpose. The previous administration allowed multinational corporations to influence policy at the expense of American families, which was the real threat to our Constitution. Critics often predict economic doom and threats to Social Security or Medicare with every Republican-led tax reform. The administration's tax policies have significantly benefited working Americans by doubling the standard deduction and reducing tax rates for families. While the wealthiest also gained, the middle class enjoyed broader deductions and credits, enhancing their financial well-being. Before global disruptions, these policies contributed to record job growth and increased wages. Now, some critics focus on the national debt, ignoring that the previous administration's approach, characterized by rampant spending and soaring deficits, offered no sustainable growth plan. The difficult fiscal choices we face today are the result of long-term bipartisan negligence, not recent tax reforms alone. Also, the real danger to Social Security and Medicare comes from proposals to expand these programs without workable funding solutions. The argument that tariffs are merely a tax on Americans misses their strategic importance. Tariffs not only generate revenue, but also level the playing field for American businesses against subsidized foreign competitors. The revenue from tariffs supports national priorities, and any future reforms will prioritize American interests. Critics often overlook the long-term damage caused by decades of open borders and extensive foreign engagements. The administration has prioritized American interests in trade, tax policy, and national security. In contrast, the opposition appears more invested in maintaining the status quo and catering to multinational corporations rather than focusing on the welfare of American workers and families. Discussions about constitutional crises and economic devastation are largely political theater. While the courts will ultimately weigh in, we must decide whether to continue our dependence on globalist policies or reclaim our economic independence and secure a prosperous future for American families. The choice for most Americans is clear.
It's a tiny amount of money within the context of the full American economy and the federal budget of the United States of America. The Wall Street Journal mocked the ridiculous Trump letter to the court as, quote, a doomsday tariff letter today. Today's report on inflation by the Bureau of Labor Statistics was the first since Donald Trump fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics for telling the truth.
The tendency to label every policy adjustment as a looming crisis fails to accurately inform the public about the state of the American economy or the federal budget. When critics dismiss tariff revenues as insignificant, they overlook their strategic importance and economic use in prioritizing American interests over foreign competitors. The Wall Street Journal's habit of mocking trade policy adjustments only perpetuates a globalist mindset that has undermined American manufacturing for decades. Recent inflation data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics exposes a consistent pattern. A stable unemployment rate just above 4%, with non-farm payrolls growing and job growth concentrated in sectors like healthcare and state government. These indicators do not suggest an economy in crisis. Some vocal critics persist in claiming that any policy shift is a threat to economic stability, ignoring the stagnation and workforce disengagement that marked the previous administration. The claim that changes in bureau leadership could compromise the integrity of economic data is not new. These agencies have struggled with methodological inconsistencies and bureaucratic inertia, often producing statistics that do not fully expose weaknesses in labor force participation and real wage growth. Calls for reform are not attacks on truth, but are necessary steps towards greater transparency and accountability. Qualities that were lacking under the last Democratic administration, which saw chronic underemployment and declining labor force participation while maintaining that everything was fine. What is truly remarkable is the selective outrage from the opposition and their media allies. They quickly criticize any Republican-led reform as a threat to democracy, yet remain silent as the federal bureaucracy expanded, debt increased, and American workers suffered. The push for tariffs and regulatory reform is about rebalancing the interests of Main Street and multinational corporations, ensuring that American economic policy prioritizes the people, not the global elite. The real debate is not about the dollar amount in tariff revenue or who leads statistical agencies. It's about whether the United States will continue to surrender economic sovereignty to international interests or reclaim the tools necessary to protect its own prosperity. As legal opinions emerge and election season intensifies, voters must decide if they want to continue with failed globalist policies or choose a government that prioritizes American jobs, families, and industries.
Before we get to Donald Trump's upset with you, let's just go to this issue as presented to the appeals court today by Donald Trump's lawyer contending that if the Trump tariffs are ruled illegal and unconstitutional, if that ruling holds, we would be sent into some kind of 1929-like disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. The amount of money, the federal government is a huge thing, so the amount of money is not that large. It will be a bureaucratic mess, because what's happened is that Donald Trump has imposed tariffs using emergency powers, using powers that are only supposed to apply when we're suffering an economic emergency. Sorry about the cat in the background. Which clearly we aren't. And
MSNBC's coverage of the ongoing appeals court battle regarding the administration's tariffs exemplifies selective outrage and economic alarmism. The reporting focuses on dire predictions and constitutional concerns, yet lacks a balanced context and overlooks the valid reasons behind these trade policies. The portrayal of a bureaucratic disaster and potential economic collapse if the tariffs are overturned leans more towards sensationalism than substance. The network's reliance on commentary from economists opposed to protectionist measures narrows the narrative and dismisses other viewpoints. Although their legal analysis points out the court's skepticism towards broad tariff authority under emergency powers, it fails to mention that a final ruling has yet to be made, and the tariffs remain in effect. This omission distorts the audience's understanding of the legal situation and the actual impact on trade policy. MSNBC's reports frequently describe tariffs as attacks on American consumers and businesses, ignoring their strategic objectives like restoring economic sovereignty and protecting domestic industries from unfair competition. The coverage seldom recognizes the tariff revenue influx or the administration's plan to allocate these funds for national priorities, instead highlighting inflation and supply chain issues without considering how past global policies contributed to these problems. The network's visual storytelling, using courtroom sketches and scrolling tariff revenue figures, aims to provoke outrage rather than inform. These techniques capture attention, but fail to encourage a nuanced discussion on the merits of rebalancing trade policy. In terms of accuracy and fact-checking, MSNBC selectively cites court rulings and expert opinions that challenge the administration's legal authority, neglecting the statutory basis for emergency tariff powers and the historical precedent for such executive actions during economic threats. Their analysis of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act presents only interpretations that align with their preferred outcome, overlooking the ambiguity and ongoing judicial debate. The reporting lacks objectivity, equating opposition to tariffs with defending American consumers, while ignoring the interests of multinational corporations and foreign competitors who benefit from open borders and unregulated trade. This bias is apparent in their coverage of the appeals court proceedings, which highlights judicial skepticism but omits any discussion of the long-term damage caused by previous administrations' globalist policies. SNBC's use of expert guests adds depth to their analysis, yet the selection is overwhelmingly critical of the current administration, with scant representation from those who support protectionist measures or question the wisdom of perpetual free trade. This lack of diverse opinions undermines the credibility of their reporting and reinforces a partisan narrative. Improvements could include a more balanced examination of the legal arguments, acknowledgement of the ongoing nature of the appeals process, and inclusion of perspectives from economists and trade experts who see the strategic importance of tariffs. The network would also benefit from greater transparency about their data sources and a willingness to examine the failures of past administrations whose policies contributed to current trade imbalances and manufacturing decline. As the appeals court deliberates the future of these measures, viewers deserve coverage that go beyond political theater and economic scare tactics, providing a genuine analysis of how trade reform can benefit American workers and families.
Today, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually said that this is a quote, "The amount of money that's coming in here, I think the more deals we've done, the more money coming in, it gets harder and harder for SCOTUS to rule against this." So there's the Treasury Secretary saying that collecting $130 billion in tariffs makes it really hard for the Supreme Court to actually uphold the Constitution.
Yeah, we've stolen a lot of money, and it would be such a pain to have to give it back, so the Supreme Court must rule that it's legal.
When the Treasury Secretary highlights the substantial tariff revenue, tens of billions of dollars each month, it's clear that this isn't just a fiscal issue, but a glimpse into how entrenched interests and government cash flow can obscure constitutional principles. Tariffs are more than bureaucratic tools. They are direct taxes on imported goods that fund everything from infrastructure to debt payments. To put it in perspective, the revenue from tariffs now rivals or exceeds the total tax revenue of many states, and that's before considering its growth over multiple years. Consider a family that starts earning significantly from a side business. The temptation to maintain this income stream grows with each deposit, similar to how Washington grows accustomed to tariff revenue, creating resistance to any legal or policy changes that might threaten it. Critics, especially those aligned with previous administrations, quickly labeled the tariff program as a constitutional crisis, overlooking the fact that similar legal mechanisms have been used for decades to adapt trade policy to national needs. The crucial question, often overshadowed by media focus on legal disputes, is how these tariffs impact American families, small businesses, and our long-term economic health. In sectors like manufacturing and agriculture, there have been both challenges and opportunities. While some domestic producers benefit from a leveled playing field, others, particularly those dependent on complex supply chains, face increased costs. Claims that reversing these tariffs would lead to a new Great Depression are largely political theater aimed at frightening voters rather than informing them. An infographic illustrating the impact of tariffs would show increased revenue, a decrease in trade deficits, and a modest rise in domestic investment. A closer look exposes that factors like global supply shocks and monetary policy also play significant roles in inflation and consumer prices. Blaming all economic problems on tariffs ignores broader issues, like fiscal mismanagement and regulatory excess by previous administrations, which have exacerbated deficits and economic burdens on Americans. From a constitutional standpoint, the Supreme Court's role is to interpret the law, not manage the federal budget. The notion that increasing revenue makes it difficult to rule against these policies exposes a concerning willingness to defend revenue streams at the cost of stretching executive authority. The legal landscape remains uncertain, with lower courts questioning the extent of presidential power under current statutes. If the Supreme Court rules against the tariffs, the government may need to refund billions to importers, funds that have likely already been spent. The opposition often overlooks the globalist policies that weakened American industry. The current administration's use of tariffs aims to recalibrate this imbalance, promoting economic sovereignty and encouraging fairer trade deals. While consumers might face short-term price increases, the overarching goal is to enhance domestic capacity and lessen reliance on adversarial trading partners. This approach isn't about seizing money, but about regaining control over our economic future. The Supreme Court's decision should focus on the law and the Constitution, not the Treasury's accustomed revenue. The stakes are significant, impacting not just Washington's finances, but the future of American independence in a global economy that often prioritizes foreign interests. Well, there you have it. Experts often warn of disaster if we prioritize America's interests, but these are the same voices that supported endless wars and compromised our workforce for inexpensive foreign goods. Tariffs are not a reckless gamble. They are a strategic tool to protect our sovereignty and restore what was lost under the previous administration. Critics concerned with legality overlook that the law supports these measures, and the revenue generated is now benefiting Americans, not global elites. Consider who truly benefits when we yield our economy to foreign powers. Perhaps it's time to stop heeding the advice of those who led us astray and start demanding accountability from those who claim to have our best interests at heart. If safeguarding our future is deemed controversial, then perhaps controversy is precisely what we need at this moment. Be sure to comment below, give a like, and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for the next one.